Yes, oh yes, oh yes. It is the latest Molly mashup, Talking Feds and Molly Jong Fast for Fast Politics, where I pose her political questions and she retorts with legal ones. But today I want to start on not exactly either, because Molly Jong Fast, as everyone in America ought to know, has a new book coming out in next month. You want to take a moment to explain a little bit about that? First of all, congratulations, a new book. Wow. Second, let's hear about it.
I wrote a book about the worst year of my life and how I got through it. And I wrote it because I wanted people to be able to live through something that feels unlivable and get through it. And that is why I wrote the book. And hopefully people will like it. The early reviews are very good, but who knows?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is about family dynamics, but I'll just say to people who don't know, which may be nobody, both your mom and your grandfather, you're really from a writer's family, and that's a big part of the backdrop here. Okay. Yeah. What do you got? What do you got?
So much of this seems as a non-lawyer to be illegal. The Supreme Court has basically given him a sweeping immunity to do crimes or whatever. But things like the crypto coin, the taking the $400 million plane from the Qataris, what is illegal here and what is not illegal? And what is the recourse?
Yeah, that's the big question, the last one. And it is crimes or whatever. So he is a walking emoluments clause violation. He was in his first term, but that was chump change, all the stuff with his hotels. $400 million palace in the sky, as they call it. That's some serious, groundbreaking, historic emolument clause violation right there in the Constitution. Same, so much of what he's doing, Molly, if you had to give a broader theme to it, is just completely eviscerating any role of Congress to decide things. And where in the Constitution it says in black and white, is that in parchment paper, that it's got to go through Congress, for example, the emoluments clause, then it's as illegal as can be. You put your finger on it, though, when you talk about remedy, because at least there, if we want to stick with the plane, it's patent that what the framers had in mind is Congress should decide. We don't want some big national political debate. We'll use Congress to make the judgment. Is this fair game or not? You know, Lincoln wanted this fancy elephant. They said no. Obama turned down the $1 million for the Nobel Peace Prize. What Trump has to do, and is not doing it, is patently illegal, is serve this up to Congress, and says right there in the Constitution. And in general, there's many things he's violating. And I think you're right. The court has given him a free pass on crimes, but that doesn't mean a free pass on illegalities, for instance, in immigration, the interpretation of the Alien Enemies Act. But this one, totally illegal. But what's designed as a congressional remedy, you do have, in fact, let me turn this back on you, though it wasn't my thought. I do think here, you have Cruz this morning saying, I don't know, man, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, you have certain, the Martin nomination just went down. He starts with a pretty close margin, and it does seem like maybe there's this much daylight beginning to form between him and the Senate, him and the Congress. What do you think about that at the political level? Which my final answer to you is it so much of it rests with Congress, and they've made it clear to date they're not going to do anything.
I actually interviewed Tammy Baldwin just now, and she said there are Republican senators who believe in the power of the Senate. So what has to happen here, I think, is that Democrats have to win back the House. Number one, we have to protect our elections, and Democrats have to win back the House. And then Democrats have to start. I think Trump is now a monarch. I don't think he can be charged with anything. I think that's a fool's errand. But I do think people like Stephen Miller and people like, you think about sort of the people around Trump who are doing things that are illegal. Maybe Stephen Miller, no, but certainly there are people who are violating, I'm thinking about Pam Bondi with, here's a woman who she got $115,000 a month from the Qatari government as a lobbyist. So are there emails between her and the Qataris? Is it on her private email or her public email? Does it look like extortion? I think the question is
or at least
not
a quid pro quo, which I think both
right.
politically and legal, that would be a real linchpin, right?
And I have to wonder if some of the mistake of Trump 1.0 was instead of going after Trump, they should have gone after every single person around him. Because going after Trump was seen, I don't think it was true because the guy did all these things that were illegal, but it was seen as political. Whereas there's clearly he has encouraged a certain lawlessness that, well, he can't be charged with it. The people around him can. And I think that's the play.
Gotcha. And it's a really interesting point because like the big indictment by Smith, he made a point of Trump only, I think for speed, but you're certainly right. Everyone, Meadows on that has gotten a walk.
Right.
Okay.
And you also see when you look at like the Rudy case or the Roger Stone, the people around Trump tend to do stuff that's really not okay. So my question would be, where does this go, right? Yeah. You have sort of when you think about the DOJ, so the Republicans there's a lot of stuff they're doing at the DOJ right now, which is like they said, they're stopping prosecuting some white collar crime because they want to be focused on the border. There's not a huge amount of stuff going on at the border, right? The numbers are down to the lowest they've been in a long time. Is there any way to get the DOJ to do its job and not to ignore
I think
crimes?
the short answer to that is no. And I'm overall sanguine about our end game here, which we can talk about if you want to. But I think the DOJ is beyond repair, beyond reclamation. And this is from talking to people in there. It's like a post-apocalyptic zone with a few zombies kind of wandering around, dazed and confused. They have really brought the hammer down. People who haven't done the kinds of cases they want or are being fired. That's sort of unheard of. Everyone it's coming home, right? Ed Martin just turned down, but meet the new boss, same as the old boss. You're going to have someone who is just as much takes this view that's just like against, it's not a little off, it's against DOJ, bone marrow DNA, that they are the president's lawyers and not the Constitution and rule of law lawyers. Whole departments are being eliminated, civil rights voting sections, public integrity. Just today, we learned about a really important prosecutorial entity that you had them in every office for organized crime and drug stuff. So I think everyone's keeping their head down. Everyone's scared to talk. People are trying to figure out, is this a good time to go out in the market, which is actually saturated with other DOJ types. Bondi and Bove are disasters who, lie daily about the supposed politicization of prosecutions under the old regime, and they're doing nothing but here. I think inside the place, it's a real disaster zone, but also outside, because judges, maybe juries, we don't know yet, but it used to mean so much. You had so much of a tailwind when you stood up Molly Jong Fast for the United States, and that's really being eroded. In general, I think the calculations I make with the DOJ is, will it ever be the same? How long until norms, for example, involving the White House, politicizing things and telling them what to do? How long will it ever be right again? But I think of it as basically a wasteland as long as, Trump is president and Bondi is AG. I'm not monolithically pessimistic across the board, but DOJ is just, can we swear on your podcast?
Yeah, I don't care.
DOJ is just fucked. I'm sorry to say.
But can the others, can the other states do stuff to hold them in check?
Yeah.
Because California, talk to me about, can Democratic AGs sue the DOJ? I mean, is there a world where that happens?
It's funny. So the different one, we were just talking about emoluments clause, and there was a big lawsuit by state AGs before saying when you do these violations, it has, I think you put your finger on it, and your listeners probably know about this stuff. Everyone's taking a crash course in law as they're standing. The short answer is some courts will say yes, some courts will say no. And there is ability by and large, I think of the sanctuary movements and stuff, for the states to assert themselves, for the states to actually regulate DOJ, say, hey, wait a second, that's against the law. You can't do that. Or even, I want this case, not you, FBI. The play is really narrow. I think federal law enforcement is not doing bad stuff, but not doing good stuff, basically, for as long as Trump is around. So look, that's part of the solution. If everything goes awry, if the court lets them go, if Congress stays supine, is state and federal power. But really it's, popular discontent and unrest. And, you've pointed out, actually, let me turn things now, because your recent Vanity Fair article is about Americans turning against Trump somewhat. And that seems true. Let me just say, not even as a partisan, but as an objective commentator, they don't seem to be turning toward, Democrats, or
No.
they're turning away from. Doesn't seem to augur a real. You mentioned, can the Dems take the House? That seems pretty uphill battle. What's your thought about why the losses for Trump don't seem to be true? Well, A, if it's true, and B, if so, why the losses for Trump, he's now at the lowest of anyone after this amount of time of president, since they've been doing polling, are not translating into commensurate or anything like commensurate gains for Dems.
I think Democrats can win back the House. I think what happened in Wisconsin with that judicial election is pretty clear case that the Republican brand is not good. By the way, whose brand is the only person who has a much worse brand than Trump is our friend Elon Musk, who really, honestly, if you look at that, if you go in and look at those exit polls, like only 5% of voters were more likely to vote for the Republican because of the Elon endorsement. Completely crazy. And that was a very expensive race. So I think Democrats can win back the House. I think the reason the brand is in the crapper is because I'll give you the reasons. People are mad, right? They are not happy. They do not feel good about the 2024 cycle.
Yeah.
I think on the Democratic side, they feel, I ask them all the time, and from what I understand, they feel angry that Democrats are not doing more, though really what can they do, right? They have they can draw attention to things, but they can't necessarily, they can't hold hearings.
Move anything. Yeah.
They can't really move things. They can't legislate. They can't do this. They can't do that. But what they can do is they can, do things like the filibuster. Like, people loved that Cory Booker filibuster. Millions of people loved it. So the question is, do they love Cory Booker's very centrist policies? Maybe not. All of these Democrats, if you think about if you ask people who are in the party who they like, they'll say AOC, Bernie, Chris Murphy, Cory Booker, Jasmine Crockett. Here are 5 people who have almost no, they're centrists, they're leftists, they're socialists. There's no unifying governing principle except, another one, Pritzker, is they are team fight. So team fight people like, and team cave people don't like. So I would say, if you're going to fight, I think there's a place for you in the Democratic Party. If you're going to cave, and interesting, there are a bunch of senators who are retiring on the Democratic side, like Gary Peters, people who maybe in a normal democracy you could have the temperament for the Senate, but probably in the what is going to happen. If Trump leaves office when his term is up, which is a real if he does, there will be a reconstruction of American democracy, which will be loud and painful and really a lot of people screaming at each other at best. And the people who are on the Democratic side and on the Republican side, but on the Democratic side, are going to need to really have a spine.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's sort of what I was thinking about DOJ. I'm overall sanguine, but man, oh man, the cleaning of the stables after. It's
going to be rough.
Herculean.
Yeah.
Talking Feds is supported by the Brennan Center for Justice. In this new political era, the Brennan Center will do what they do best: defend the Constitution and the rule of law. They're prepared to fight against presidential overreach and will continue advocating for reforms to resist weaponized government, stop billionaires from corrupting our elections, and ensure every eligible American has the freedom to vote. Stay informed by visiting BrennanCenter.org.
What are people doing in the Trump DOJ right now that is illegal?
Okay. Well, so it's a really good question, because first you got to think about abnormal. Like when I hear about certain things, my head goes 360 degrees, but it's not technically speaking illegal for the White House to do certain things. I think they are violating the 1978 Civil Service Reform Act, right and left. They're firing people. You can't do that. They get certain due process. They're doing things specifically in violation. You could either say the First Amendment, Fifth Amendment, because people take certain positions, righteous positions, the Adams prosecution, whatever, and they're getting fired for that. The big thing they're doing, and very effectively, but will there be remedies, is hollowing out the department, meaning all the sort of the knowledge of the place. The way it works is there are anywhere a sort of handful of people, you come to them, you work through them together. They're all gone. They've been demoted to, asset forfeiture in Kentucky or whatever. Right. And it's the culture of the place that's been so comprehensively denuded and is so making it ineffective. Then I think there are some flat out violations of law in general. I'm a fraud lawyer, and when you lie about stuff and make a scheme, this is what Trump was charged with before he had immunity, that can be a crime, and a vigorous Department of Justice will never see it, will never have it, even later would construct certain things that Beauvais is doing and Bondi is doing, because all they're trying to do is serve his political interests, which do not coincide with the law. But the bigger stuff, look, there's an overall lesson, a bitter lesson of the last few months, or even you could say last 8 years, which is that at the end of the day, the government runs on norms, good faith, integrity, ways of doing things that people of different views accept. And it's really that they've totally raised. And so the impact is terrible. And then in addition, I could maybe make some U.S. versus Bondi arguments, U.S. versus Beauvais argument, but the real terrible damage is sort of at the cultural functional level. All right, I want to throw you it won't be a curveball for you, but a curveball in our conversation, because I just had a long talk with Jonathan Haidt, who you may know from NYU, and his big spiel is how terrible social media has been for younger voters and what a disaster it is for the younger generation. And you on the ZDO podcast, you really the hardest working woman in podcastery, I must say. Said the fundamental problem with Democrats among the older generation is they can't get online, which is kind of the very opposite of his diagnosis, at least for younger Dems. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and I wanted to ask you to flesh that out a little.
The problem is communication, right? Nobody will argue, maybe they will, but they're wrong. Joe Biden passed a lot of legislation, really good legislation, right? onshoring manufacturing, chips and sciences. The thing that Donald Trump just did a whole fuck up about, right? Onshoring manufacturing. Biden actually passed something that would have and has to some extent got semiconductor chips going in the United States, making semiconductor chips. I mean, this is seismic stuff. The reason why Biden was unpopular was inflation and an inability to transmit what he was doing. Nobody knew. In fact, there's these Google searches of election day where people went on their computer to see who was running for president because they thought Biden was still running for president. Okay. So this is a big fucking problem. And it comes from the supposition that politics runs downstream of culture. This is a Andrew Breitbart-ism. Andrew Breitbart, right-wing lunatic, died. That guy said politics runs downstream of culture. And what Donald Trump did was he got into the bloodstream of the culture. And so he won the presidency. What Democrats have done studiously is completely stay outside of the culture. And they've done it, I think, because they're being advised by people who are terrified of their own shadows. So this is why sometimes you'll have a elected who you'll get on your podcast and you'll ask them a question and they'll say, America, because it's Amera and it's ka. And you'll think, this doesn't make any sense. And what the fuck are they? You've had those electeds. And that is the consultant class getting in their brains, making them think that saying nothing is better than saying something. And the reality is, the more Democrats say nothing, the more they open the door to a Donald Trump, to another Donald Trump, and that is how we got here. And the only way to get out of it is to have people who run for office who say English words and are real people and say things like, this is what I'm going to do and this is what I'm not going to do, and really let you in, or at least pretend to enough.
Always good and always fun talking to you, Molly. Good luck with the book, and see you next month. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.